Mack Payne, you're a Vietnam veteran, and you served 2 tours in Vietnam, and your second tour, you were a pilot of a Cobra gunship, and so you saw a fair amount of combat. And we've talked about your experience in Vietnam, and you have a lot of positive things to say about your experience in Vietnam. You also had a son, or have a son, who served in the Army and was deployed in Afghanistan and Iraq. So just the first question to kind of get this conversation going.
Yeah.
What's the basic difference between being a young man in a combat zone and being the father of a young man in a combat zone? Just how do you go at that?
There's no description, and it was a very educating experience. I remember when I went over. Well, when you're young, you're oriented to what's in front of you. What are we doing? It's going to be dangerous and all this. And at the time, my father had only died 2 or 3 years prior to that. So my mother, I call her my poor widowed mother. When I remember I went over both times, and you say hello, goodbye and everything, as we go. But when I left, I was going that way. I was concerned about where I was going, what I was going to be doing, and would I live through it, and things like that. Very seldom, and this is the part I'm sad to say, ashamed to say a little bit, I very seldom ever thought about what my poor widowed mother was going through. And I would do things, especially on the second tour. I don't know how, sometimes when I would be up there, she knew I was up there at Quezon. It was on the news, everything going on at Quezon. It was dangerous. And I never indicated anything was dangerous. But it's a clueless me, just like when we were in the Tet Offensive, and I was dedicated to paying our people. Forget about the Tet Offensive. I'm paying my people. Move that machine gun out of the way. It was like that. So I go over there for the 2 years, about clueless the effect it was having on the family. I had some siblings. I remember my mother did say, I always thought that was funny. She would say, I really hope you don't get married to a Vietnamese woman over there. I said, I don't think there's the chance of marrying a Vietnamese. But I said, aren't you worried about me getting shot? Because her big concern seemed to be that I was going to marry a Vietnamese. Which there were very nice Vietnamese ladies over there, but it wasn't conducive to getting married to them at that time. But that was her big concern, and I was thinking, I thought that was sort of funny. But time moves on. I get married, and I have some children. One of them is a son, Richard Warren Payne, who currently is working for Morgan Stanley on the 7th floor of a beautiful building in Colorado Springs, Colorado, with a window that looks out of the Rocky Mountains out there. I had to throw that in. But anyway, he went to the University of, followed in my footsteps to the University of Florida. And when he got out, he didn't go through the ROTC program like I did, but he joined the Army. I did not know he wanted to join the Army. But he joined the Army, and things are going along, and then suddenly the Iraq War comes along, and followed by the Afghanistan. So we get word, he lets me know, hey, my unit, the 173rd Airborne Brigade, is going over to Iraq. And I said, oh, God. Suddenly, when he said that, there was this big weight, like it was on your chest, and especially when he was there. And you would see all these, the news reports about all the fighting going on. And it was incredible. I could not imagine the worry and concern that I was feeling, and I could hardly imagine how my mother stood it, because I wasn't aware of it. But when the tables were turned and my son was over there, it was tough. And
what year is he there in Iraq? Do you remember?
I don't even remember.
Okay.
Because whenever the Iraq wars, he claims that he was at the installation when they killed Hussein. They captured.
Pretty early then. Pretty early.
Yes, he was there, and I think they went back there 2 or 3 times. Then he went over to Afghanistan 2 or 3 times. And of course, the tours were only shorter, 4 or 6 months, something like that. But it was tough. When he would come home, you would have this tremendous feeling of relief. Thank the good Lord above, he's home. But they would like go right back. He would say, well, we're going back. I said, you're going back. But it was tough.
Yeah.
And of course, and then in this case, we did get that phone call in the middle of the night. You know, you always dread that phone call. Well, I got one. And the vehicle he was in was blown up with a mine over there in Afghanistan. And fortunately, there were 4 people in the vehicle. 3 were wounded. 1 went back to duty. And he suffered a fairly serious back injury. Had to put some metal in his back. And they said that luckily they operated him right there in country. It was a serious operation, but they did it in country at Bagram, I think so, back somewhere over there. But he was able to, still he recovered and he wanted to stay in the Army, but he couldn't make it on those 60-mile marches. He couldn't keep up. So they they retired him. And he was retired medically. He went to, I tell you, you hear a lot of people talk about the VA, about how they're not doing their job.
Yeah.
But both my experience and his experience, and he will say this, that I don't think he could have received any better treatment. They took real good care of him, and he recovered. Like I say, he wanted to stay in, but he just he couldn't recover good enough to stay in there. And he got out. He went to school and picked up his MBA, which shocked me. Talk about a shock. I did not realize he was such a student because he never exhibited any interest in school, but he went, maybe when you get older, but he went back, came in first in his class in the MBA program there at the University of Colorado.
Yeah.
I was at Colorado State. And then a lot of people worry about getting jobs. They came to him. Morgan Stanley said, you're coming to work with us in the 7th floor of this fabulous building. But anyway, the feeling that, it's just incredible. And then I go back to the wall in Washington. 58,000
yeah.
names. That's 58,000 plus fathers and mothers who suffered this incredible loss of a child over in a wartime.
Over in Vietnam.
Really, I never really appreciated it until I had a son who was over there.
Yeah.
And
can you take a step by step through that? I mean, I'm assuming you're in bed, the phone rings, somebody passes a message to you. Could you just kind of walk us through that step by step? You hear the phone ring, you know that something must be up, or you know what I mean? Can you walk us through that?
Actually,
getting that message.
My daughter somehow got the message first, and she called me, and this is something else. I can't say enough good about the way they handled it. The next day, I received a call from a very nice, I think she was a staff sergeant, she was like a case officer. And she held me by the hand through the whole process. You know, she kept me informed on where he was, his condition. They worked on him, operated on him in Afghanistan, sent him to Landstuhl, Germany, and then they sent him to Walter Reed and up there in D.C. But she stayed with me through the whole thing, and they had this really nice deal where I think it was 3 people, 3 family members. The government would pay. They said, well, he's going to be coming in she told me when he's coming in. And he said, you might want to visit him. I said, well, I may go. It's kind of expensive to fly up there. She says, oh, no, you don't have to pay for it. We pay for it. So they paid for the transportation up there, paid for the hotel. They gave you an allowance, just like you're back in the Army, for food. And so they brought us up there. And I was so impressed with the way they handled the situation. She called me the next day. about him and was immediately giving me updates on where he was, what he was doing, the status of his condition, and when he would get back in the States. And then she set it all up to how we would fly up there and set up a hotel. And I mean, I was impressed with the way. And then I hear people complain about the way they treat the veterans, and they treated us fine.
Yeah. Have you and your son, have you kind of had, have you had discussions where you kind of, for lack of a better way of putting it, sort of swap war stories, or have you had those kinds of discussions where you, or just sort of compare notes about military service in combat zones?
I come from a line of family, the Paynes, from up in Alabama. We don't do a lot of talking about all that touchy-feely stuff. And no, we hadn't talked about it too much. And well, one thing, he is very sensitive about it, because, and this is what gets me. If I was a parent of some of these people, I'd complain, because where he had this, I guess you'd call it an accident, where his truck hit the mine in this little village. A week later, the same unit, same type truck, went down the same road, and guess what? They hit another, they call them IUDs or something. IEDs.
Yeah.
Anyway, that truck, I guess I learned a little bit about my son's incident. The next truck that came by a week later was blown up and killed all four of them, and all four of them were very good friends of my son.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, and when he was telling me about it, I says, wait, you mean a week later, they took the same truck that you were blown in and went down the same trail in the same village? I said, that doesn't, I wasn't there, and I don't know what was happening, but it didn't sound real smart. It looks like they'd have gone around this way the next time. But no, we don't talk about it too much.
Yeah. It seems like there are some just...
Don't talk about those things much.
Yeah. It just seems like in the nature of the war, there are some similarities between Afghanistan and Vietnam. Just
not too many.
What's that?
There's a lot of things that were different. I don't know of too many things that were the same. For instance,
well, I think just the nature of the combat, not knowing who's friend or foe.
Yeah, that would be. There's some elements that were similar.
Yeah.
A whole lot of them that were. One big difference was because they would do a lot of traveling, and they traveled in their fatigue uniforms or whatever they call them.
Right.
Tell me how they would, when they would go into restaurants.
Right.
I mean, they never bought anything, never bought any drinks, never bought any food. And he said there were times where people would give them ovations when they'd walk through the airport. And we didn't get too many ovations.
Well, yeah. Do you think your son's experience, because, I think a lot of us witnessed this, a person in uniform is walking through the airport and is thanked, et cetera. Do you think that was sort of a cultural response to the memory of what happened to the guys who came home from Vietnam?
I've heard that. And a lot of people say that the Vietnam veterans made the way for the veterans today, but a lot of these Vietnam veterans say that they will never allow what happened to them to happen to any more veterans. So
right.
Real big into supporting the veterans.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd say maybe they paved the way a little bit for them.
Yeah, yeah. Has your son, I know a lot of veterans come home from war and aren't necessarily interested in talking about it, kind of want to put it behind them. Has that kind of been your son's response? He just wants to move on, or the two of you haven't talked about it so much, but is he interested in sharing about his experiences?
He doesn't seem to talk that much about it. But, he lives out in Colorado, so I don't get to see him that much. But no, we don't talk too much about it.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you just one last question I have, and then I'll then you can make whatever final statement you'd like.
He likes to talk a lot about the houses that he's in building and buying and selling and investing in out in Colorado Springs. He likes to talk about that. But I'm sorry. Go ahead. What
advice would you have for parents who have a child in a combat zone? Of course, right now, Here we're talking in mid-2019. We still have troops in Afghanistan. We have troops in Syria. We have troops in Iraq. We have special forces in various places around the world. What bit of advice would you give to parents who have a son or a daughter in a combat zone right now?
Well, probably the number one thing I would say would pray constantly.
Yeah.
Because there's not much you can do about it other than support them, and you just hope that they've been trained properly and they have good supervision and they do the right thing. And like I say, pray every day for them that they get home safely. But other than that, I would just say try and keep an even keel and do what you can, because I think about it. I keep thinking about all those names on that wall. And I think about, I knew one guy once who his job back here in the States was to go there and notify. They would always go in person to notify the people when someone died.
Yeah.
And the reactions that he got from the families. And it's just terrible. So the only advice I could give is just hang in there and hope for the best. And, more than likely, there aren't a lot of them dying over there now. It's a few happen here and there, but
Yeah.
they can get home safely. The main thing is just love your children, appreciate them, and do what you can to support them, with what they're doing, and just be supportive and give them a big hug before they go, and then when they get back, give them several big hugs.
Yeah, I hear that. Well, maybe someday I'll be able to talk with your son about his experiences. But right now, Mr. Payne, I just want to thank you, first of all, for your service in Vietnam, 2 tours in Vietnam. Thank your son for his tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Thanks also for the podcast that you have, VietnamVeteranNews.com.
Could I invite everybody here to go there, and it's VietnamVeteranNews.com, and subscribe to it and listen to my humor. I recently put on a new element that I'm really excited about. I put on in the beginning an intro with John Wayne saying the Pledge of Allegiance.
Oh,
So, you can do things like that.
yeah.
I invite everybody, if you want to know about Vietnam, the war and the veterans and what they're doing now, go to the VietnamVeteranNews.com.
Yeah.
You don't mind a little plug like that, do you?
There you go. So thank you for that, and thank you for spending time with us in one discussion, talking about your own service in Vietnam. In this discussion, focusing on your son. I appreciate you taking the time with us.
It was my pleasure. I thank you so much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Take care.